Are you a solo gamer who feels left out when multiplayer games don't include your player count? Well, do I have a video for you. Hello and welcome back to the Board Gamer Girl channel. But if you're new here, my name is Natalie and I like to talk about all things board games, but from a primarily solo perspective. Today we are doing a special video and one that is very close to my heart, as it was what springboarded me into realizing that solo gaming can be applied to a lot more games than I originally thought. And that's because I'm going to go through some of the 10 solo modes that I found on Board Game Geek that helped me access multiplayer games I really wanted to play, but didn't have enough people to play them with. And especially some of those games that were really hyped up that I just automatically discarded. I found magical community on Board Game Geek that some very clever people did solo variants for games, which, I mean, led me to even think I could do a solo variant. And that was for Off With Their Heads, which if you haven't seen, I'll put it somewhere. But for today's list, I also want to mention that I will be looking at a computer just so that I am able to remember which solo variants they are. I am not an actress. I usually do not do scripts for these videos, to be honest. I found when I do scripts, I look like I've got a pickle up my butt. And I didn't like that, so I'm not doing that. So sometimes I will read, maybe you'll turn away, maybe you won't, maybe I'll be the only one watching this video, who knows, we're here for fun. Anyways, before we get started, I'm going to take some tea. Also, I forgot, I decided not to wear a hat today. So many changes! I do have hair underneath that hat. And I also have no glasses. I have 2 pair. These are extra nerdy. And I thought, why not? Nerdy is the new cool, right? Anyways, as we get into this video, let me just go over some of the rules I applied to myself as I was looking for 10 different fan-made solo modes for multiplayer games that I've played over the years. Some fan-made solo modes were so good they became the official solo mode, but these were fan-made solo variants that I played before they officially came out with either their own box or their own new edition that included it, etc. So some don't have an official fan-made solo mode now, but we'll go through the list and we'll get to it. If you have questions, ask them in the comments. I'll respond eventually. Let's see. Where shall we start? Let's start with what was a game that originally was on my very first top board games list that I ever created, like 2017. I feel like this game came out in 2016 or 2017. But anyways, this one has us wrangling cows, and the first edition of this box was gray with very unhappy male individuals on the cover, and I do prefer the second edition, and that is why I have the second edition here. All right, sorry folks, I just spilled the whole game out, so this is an edit, but my first game I'm going to talk about is Great Western Trail, and it was one of the first games that was multiplayer. It honestly was not that appealing based on the cover and thinking that, how is a game fun? You're just collecting cows and bringing them into some town to whatever, gain money and continue to do that over and over. But it was literally... It wasn't my top game of all time, but it was definitely one of the top games and still is one that I really love. But the solo mode that is now officially in the second edition and has been refined a bit, adds the cemental cows that was the addition for the second edition. Otherwise, the game is basically the same as the first edition. Well, with an important note that some theming on some not very nice parts are now cleaned up a bit, so I do appreciate that. But the original solo mode was by a person from BGG. And again, I will put all of the fan-made solo variants in the description below. I know this one is officially in the second edition, but if you have the first edition still of Great Western Trail, you too can play it solo. And just for this solo mode, it was named Garth, and for some of the points that I wanted to put into each of the solo fan-made modes was also giving points on whether it was competitive, cooperative, how it plays, etc., etc. So for this one, the AI will get a solo deck of cards, and it will be a competitive variant, so it is you facing this Mautoma player named Garth. And I will say, because you are having to simulate the Garth player's turns, that there is more of a medium amount of upkeep. This consists of flipping the cards, looking up the iconography if you're not sure about the iconography, although I feel like once you get into it, it's pretty easy and adaptable to understand as you're going through after you've played it maybe at least once. And then of course going through their steps on the board of how to play or what to collect or take off the board or put on the board. So you're still doing that, but I do really appreciate being able to play this game solo. And I think I only recently played this game multiplayer last year, and I had this game since it came out pretty much and only played it solo, and it was one of my top games. So I would highly recommend this solo mode for Great Western Trail. And yeah, that is that first one. We are well away. Now let me try to not drop this next one. So this next one is a cutesy looking area control game that was very popular but did not have a solo mode until the second expansion. And that second expansion was the Riverfolk expansion. And I never played that one. I was not interested, but I really wanted to try this game, and I thought there's no way that there is a way to play this solo. And then, of course, hold on, who was it? The Better Bot Project came to Board Game Geek and gave everyone a fan-made solo variant where you're playing competitively against more than one AI character. And then the people at Leader Games, I guess, saw this, and they didn't just do one Clockwork expansion, they did two of them. And each expansion has each of the different characters that have been released, or factions characters, whatever you know. And each one plays similarly to how the multiplayer experience is, but they found a way to simulate how a robot version of that faction would play. So you can play solo with one other character in play, but you could also play a full 4-player game. So when I first played Root, I took it out of the box and I tried to learn the main factions. Then I went with what was the most simple faction, which I believe was the Marquis de Cat. And then I played them against what was at least the second easiest faction in a Clockwork box that came out. So that way, one helped me learn how to play each of them individually, but I will say what also helped me learn the game after a while was because I didn't get it right at release, because at that time I was like, I don't know if I'd get this played, but the Root digital app on my Nintendo Switch really helped me learn the game. They have great tutorials that are interactive there, and they confirmed a few things for me. So then I went back to Root and I tried to simulate doing a 4-player game. So myself and 3 other base factions from the Clockwork first expansion. And it's doable, but I wouldn't suggest it unless maybe you're a diehard Root fan or you're practicing different strategies, because Root itself is more of a lifestyle game. And what I mean by that is you kind of discover and do better strategy the more you play the game. That was probably the biggest hurdle to access an entry into playing Root with a group of people regularly. So it also gave people that were interested in playing a way to play it if you didn't have friends all the time. Or if you were someone who wanted to play it more than your friends did. The upkeep is high, but the solo variant is still competitive. It is, again, a hard learning curve in the sense that, one, you should get familiar with the base game characters already, because you'll be doing similar things with the robotic characters. But I liked it. It gave me access to root. It actually caused me to get like everything root. And I really need to get back to playing root because it's been so long. And I'm really curious to try and play it with people. But again, the biggest hurdle for me is finding people who still want to play this at a table. For this next one, it is the Board Game Geek current #1 best game of all time at the moment, until the next thing comes up. But I got the Kickstarter version of this, like found it in the world, and I grabbed this in Lancashire. It was a very like peak, let's buy all the things and then find a solo variant later time in my life. So eventually I did get rid of Lancashire because the solo variant was only utilized for Brass Birmingham. And since that time, there are now 3 solo variants. So I've only played one of the 3. This game is Brass Birmingham. I can't tell if that shows correctly. But yes, it's so pretty. I don't know why this lady is in the puddle, but that sucks. So I'm going to go through each of the solo modes, give you the little undertaking as to how these play. And again, I can't speak for each of them. I'll only be looking at the experiences that I found online that reference the solo modes I haven't played. So the solo mode that I played was very, very simple. It had a really low, minimal brain need. Oh my God, what's the word? Minimal upkeep for you to utilize for the character known as George. And this Mautoma was done by BGG user McTay811. It is still a competitive variant, but you will only need, I think, a D20 or a D20 and a D6. And all of the different types of actions for the George character is determined by a roll of the dice. Depending on what you roll from a 1 to a 6, you'll either build or you'll put a road or a rail or a canal. And they'll still be dealing with their cards that they'll use for actions. They'll still be spending money to determine who's first each round and all of that good stuff. So it's still like, it feels like you're playing with somebody else. The difference with this Mautoma is that obviously sometimes they won't take the optimal move, or sometimes they do things that don't necessarily make sense, as the mode itself is obviously determined by a roll of the die. So there's randomness in this one. But it is still competitive, so you do have to beat the George character in scoring. They will get scoring, I believe, in this one. So then there was the second fan-made, or I don't know the order of these, it's just the way I've predetermined to talk about these for Brass Birmingham. But the second one is called Eliza, and it's by Tony A680 on BGG doing a solo mode. But for the Eliza variant, they also digitized their solo variant so that you can use it on your phone as an app. I think you can use it as an app or as a web page thing. But they also released, I believe, a 7-episode solo campaign called The Mechanist. So you don't just have to play against this Eliza character, but you can do a 7-episode campaign like you're playing a longer game that feeds into each other, which is really neat and unique for a game like this. Again, I haven't played it, so I can't speak to it as much. Again, because of the way that this is done, I believe It's minimal to maybe just under medium upkeep for this one, because you're still referencing what you're doing, but depends on also if you're using the manual printable version or if you're using their digital app in order to tell you what to do. And you'll have to do different selections within the app that helps determine what you're going to do next for Eliza. Again, I believe it's the same thing for the campaign, but I can't speak to it as I haven't tried it myself. The last one, and probably the most, not the most famous one, but the most well-known version of a fan-made solo for Brass Birmingham is the Mautoma. And Mautoma itself has a whole bunch of digital solo modes that are for various games out there. And this one was one that Brass Birmingham has, and I believe Board Game Dave did a solo playthrough of that one, and that was one that I was referencing when I was trying to learn and play it myself. I'll link his playthrough, if I can find it and remember it, in the description or somewhere in this video. It's another one where you can print the components that you'll need for the Mautoma, or you can use their app. I believe it's a web-based app, and it's similar, but you will need to know the iconography. And I think while using the app, that was what was difficult for me, in the sense that I feel at that time I was relearning Brass Birmingham at the same time as trying to learn the solo mode. And you solo folks know the extra step in trying to learn a game, learn the solo mode of a game, and then apply both of those things and all that knowledge by yourself, and hoping you are playing it correctly. So at the time, it just didn't work out. But it is still competitive. To me, again, because of my experience with it, or my half-assed experience with it, I found it the most difficult upkeep of the three. Brass Birmingham was like my Great Western Trail, where it was another game where, thank goodness, I found a fan-made variant to play it, because it is also one of my favorite games. And now let's get to something a little easier. So this game is one that I didn't think you could simulate solo. It's more of a family-friendly game as well. It's not like super deep. There is some strategy to it, but there's also randomness in rolling dice. And this game is Space Base. And this was super popular a few years ago, but playing it solo, obviously it doesn't say that, but there is a fan-made solo variant. For this variant, let's see who does it. Oh my goodness, if I forgot who did this one, I'll still credit them in the description, because I don't want to not have credited people and their hard work. But this fan-made solo variant, you are basically pre-setting a second player's board, and for every turn you take, they'll be taking 3 turns. So, okay, if you're not familiar with Space Base, what you're doing is you're collecting different cards and you're putting them on the top of your board. On your turn, you'll be collecting anything for cards you've collected that match that dice roll. So let's say you rolled a 2 or a 3. If you have a card in the 2, the 3, or the 5 spot by adding the dice together, you can take those actions. But those actions that you can take on your die rolls are the yellow actions. On somebody else's turn, you may also be able to take actions, but you'll only be able to take the actions of cards you have already allotted and swapped up to the top of your board, where it's flipped to the red area. And those actions don't go off unless another player has rolled on their turn, and you end up having that 2, 3, or 5 card. That's basically the gist of the game, and it's the first person that can get to 40 points. So imagining that there's a solo mode for this seems really weird, but it was so simple, and it's competitive, but it's more of a race. I mean, the whole thing is a race anyways in multiplayer. But you'll take your turns as normal. For the AI character, you'll be simulating as if you're playing a 4-player game. So they'll still be taking cards away, and you'll preset their little player counter to the 40 on their track. At the beginning of each of their turns, they're going to take that counter down 1 spot so that you only have a certain amount of turns for you to get to 40 and before they count down to 0. And then you'll be rolling their set of 2 dice 3 times, so that if at any moment those dice pair with any of the cards that you would be able to take an action for on an opponent's turn, which is one of the more exciting things. Space Base itself was really well known for having like no downtime, and that's what made it really fun. It did have a bit of a slower start, and I do believe that some of the expansions helped do a quick start mode, which I would never play without it. I don't have it for my physical copy. I used to play it a lot more on Board Game Arena. So it's competitive, but it's more of a countdown clock with very minimal upkeep. You're not really doing much for the AI character, and everything is kind of still going towards you and how you're playing your game. So you still have access to the game. I'm not sure, for me it made it worth the purchase. I did still play it with family, but I was able to access it solo to try the game before I taught it as well. Okay, so with the next game, I had come across Ricky Royal, who is Box of Delights, and I mean, they've got a whole bunch of solo variants for multiplayer games, and they've even gotten some official solo modes for whirligig games that are well known. I've played the PAX Premier one, and I believe they did the one for Molly House. But I was curious about this game, was lucky to find that they had a solo mode, and then they typically do videos showing them unboxing the game itself, but also playing the solo mode themselves so that you can see how it works. So for The King is Dead 2nd edition, the solo mode is easy and difficult at the same time. So let me explain. In the game The King is Dead, it's an area control game for 8 different territories. The game lasts 8 rounds, and every player has 8 cards. Every player has the same 8 cards in their hand. There is no drawing. Everyone starts with the same stuff. You'll randomly grab a couple cubes from a bag to start the game, and that's kind of who your alliance is. So similar to PAX Premier in the sense that you're not necessarily playing as a specific group, but more of trying to strategically align yourself with what the most probable or hopefully best outcome will be, and you'll be aligned with kind of the winner. I don't like saying that in history and stuff, but history is its own special little thing. But I digress. In this game, there's, I think, the Welsh, the English, oh my God, the Welsh, the English, is it the Irish? No, it can't be. Wait, let me see. The Scottish. I am so sorry. Please do not hurt me, Scottish folks. Or Irish folks. Anyways, there are 3 different cube colors, red, blue, and yellow. And these are the different types of alliances fighting for these different territories. So you'll randomize where those cubes go. I think you'll start with 4 cubes in each territory. And each round consists of seeing what territory will be fighting for the majority in that territory for that round. And everyone can play a card on their turn. Each card has a different power, typically moving cubes from one place to another. And again, it's kind of open knowledge that everyone has the same cards. It just depends on, are you going to play a card this round or not? And how many cards are you going to play to move cards? And that is kind of the deep strategy that I did not think could translate to a solo mode, because a whole bunch of it is playing the players, as you'll only ever have 8 cards to play in the whole game. So if you spend them all early, you can't do anything with your alliances. But you'll only ever collect cubes to show who your allegiance is if you play an action card. So there's a fine balance there. Now, with the solo mode, it's a one-sheet thing where depending on how the board is arranged or your actions will determine how the solo player takes something. So if they take a cube, they'll actually be drawing from their deck. Like you'll shuffle up their deck, you'll place it face down, and for the beginning of each turn, they'll flip a card, but only after you've completed your entire turn for that round. So you know the cards that are coming up, so it still keeps that kind of intensity around, but how they will play out that card is kind of a list of, if this is possible, they'll do this, but if it's not, move down to the next option. If this is possible, do that, next option. And trying to determine that takes a second, so I'm really happy that there was like a visual aid in Ricky Royal being able to have a video to watch how they play. But it also just takes like 20 minutes, and you very rarely win, but it's very satisfying to play, because if there's a tie in a region, you'll play a France disc. And if there are 3 France discs on the board, then the game ends and France has like infiltrated the UK, I guess. And then at the end, you'll be trying to determine if you have more cubes than the AI has taken from the board within the rankings of which allegiance was more powerful. And just the balance of all of that, it's such a heavy experience when it sounds like it, but for it to play in 20 minutes, I would literally re-rack and restart over and over again. And that is every time I go to play this game. I really almost want to play it when I'm done this video, so maybe we'll do that. We'll see. If you haven't played The King is Dead and you've not been able to because you need it solo, well, now's your chance, bud, thanks to Ricky Royal. All right, let's get to... oh, I forgot to say. So, before I keep forgetting, I ramble. But The King is Dead is obviously a competitive variant. It's very low maintenance, but it's more of a head scratcher as to questioning which move to take, because it depends on the board state, and that in itself, it's difficult to weight that. The upkeep for the solo mode I find is minimal to maybe just under medium as well. But for our next one, this is one of the older ones that I discovered. And again, it also has a visual aid, which I will put in the description. Everything again, I'll put in the description, or I'll put in the video if there's a video reference of the solo mode I'm talking about. So this one is Arboretum. Is that how you say it? Arboretum. Yep, Arboretum. And it is known as being a... it looks pleasant, but pleasant is deceiving, as it is very... like, it's like the level of Monopoly of competitiveness, where but this is like disguised with pretty trees and everything. Monopoly, you obviously know, is all capitalism and rawr. Anyways, Arboretum is a game where you're pretty much doing different types of trees, different colored trees that you can place orthogonally and create lines that go from 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 8. And depending on the value of the card or the streak of colors that you have together, you'll be able to score. But you can only score your different colored trees if you have the most or highest number of that tree card in your hand at the end of the game. Because at the end of the game, everyone's still going to have a set of cards. If somebody has the 1 in their hand, it can knock off somebody that's kept an 8 and only an 8 in that card color as well. So it gets really crazy and nasty almost. Not nasty like, rawr, like just like, you know, it's still a game, so play games, they're fun. But the solo variant for this one was created by D-Junking on BGG. I believe they have a different name on YouTube for the video that I'll reference later somewhere. But it's a competitive variant, and it takes a second to learn, but it makes it accessible, and their solo mode makes it so that you still have that intensity that you do get from playing a person, because what you're giving away determines or possibly assists the AI in what they'll take. So they'll take high value cards, or depending on if they have 2 of a certain color of a card, they will continue to get that type of card. So they'll be scoring higher for different things. And I feel like I've gotten like 50-50 when playing this solo variant. It's also very quick, and you'll have your set of cards to determine at the end what you score and what you can't. But they start the game with their own hand of cards as well that you don't know what they get. It's really good. And again, for a game like this, I did not think you could find a good enough solo mode, but surprise, the community is really great and gave me access to playing games solo. So thank you very much. So the game itself, I find it minimal AI turns, but it does take at least a game or 2 to play the game, to figure out the flow of the solo. I will also say the most difficult part of learning this game, because I learned this game from scratch, but for playing this game, I think the most difficult thing was learning how to score. And playing the game seems like, okay, I've got that under control. But the tricky way of what and how things score is the most difficult part of the game in general. And that is still the case for at least yourself if you're unfamiliar with how the game plays. So I would say it's minimal if you already know how to play Arboretum. The solo mode will not be as difficult. If you're starting from scratch, the game itself and learning that makes it more of a medium experience. So anyways, let's go to our next game. So I have accidentally typed random things on my computer. It says plee. The next game was one that I discovered and I got in a trade, and it has the fanciest components that everyone compliments me on, so yay for me. It is the older version, and the newer version that was crowdfunded a few years ago came with an expansion that added 6 different iterations of solo modes that you can play on their own or combine depending on different modules that you use. And that game is Grand Austria Hotel. And the solo mode I'm referencing is specifically the Leopold solo mode. So the Leopold fan-made solo mode is actually made by BGG user George S. And it simulates a 2-player experience. I would say that it's a minimal upkeep. Their moves aren't necessarily always optimal, but their moves are kind of the same as the Ricky Royal. It's about 1 sheet that you have to have for the solo mode, and it depends on what's in the market, and they'll take the most valuable guest that they can. They don't have like their own resources or whatever. They automatically get those things. And then they will draft an action die from the action die selection area based on how many of a certain number of die are rolled in that area. So if you're unfamiliar with Great Western Trail, if you're unfamiliar with Grand Austria Hotel, you're serving guests and trying to bring them to your restaurant in order to feed them the food that they request, get their bonuses, and then tuck them into bed in your hotel room with a hotel room that you've prepared so that they can stay over. And this also in some way pleases the emperor that your hotel is doing well. I don't know. 2 parts of your turn: drafting the guests from the main board, and then you have this action selection board where, depending on how many dice are rolled, will make that action selection available. So if the dice roll or dice pool was rolled for that round and there is no 1 in that area, then no one can take that action this turn, except for if you're able to take a 6 dice that was present during that roll and use that wild action to take any of the other actions as if it was from that area. But anyways, the whole point is talking about the solo mode. So the Leopold mode was one that I utilized to play this game, and therefore I picked up locally, which came with fancy fantasticness. And I think it was probably the first time that I saw sleeves in a board game, and that took me on its own other adventure. But it's a very quick solo mode. I learned the game from scratch and then learned the solo mode, and it was really easy to integrate. And then, of course, when the crowdfunding campaign came out and I found out that there were going to be multiple solo modes, I got that and I tried that, and some of the solo modes I utilize now, but Leopold is most familiar to me, so it's usually what I still use. I think there's different solo modes that are kind of just like a tweak that let you use certain modules, but I will say that the main module that was added to that expansion, I think it's like champagne and dancing and something, is one that I don't usually like to play. I prefer the base game the way it is, and a few of the different modules that they added into that one. That was a little extra thing that didn't need to be said, but whatever. I talk a lot, and if you're still here, I'm probably just talking to myself. What am I talking about? Let's go on to the next one. So this game was my favorite game of all time for most of my years in the hobby. And this game is Vindication. And Vindication looks like, well, it's just cubes on a board. You're literally just pushing cubes around the board. And somehow I loved it so much. And I think the first time that I saw it was John Gets Games. And somehow that playthrough convinced me to get it, but there wasn't a solo mode. Or there was a solo mode, but yes, there was a solo mode, but it was changed and not necessarily replicating the multiplayer game experience. It's its own special golem, no, its own special thing with a little miniature that you play with. And thankfully, BGG user Svardosi and created by Will Callan's Dummy Player Rules did this Golem AI. And it is also only a set number of pages, so I think like 2 or 3 printed out. It's a competitive variant, but it's also really easy to understand. Each type of action is determined by rolling a dice, and then depending on the state of the board, the golem competitor will do certain actions. And it made it accessible multiplayer, and somehow it was my favorite game. I think I've only played it multiplayer once, and I've only played it this like by myself, and it was my favorite game ever. And I think that's saying something for this solo mode. It also is a solo mode that I find is minimal in upkeep. Again, you're still taking things for the solo player, so for the golem competitor, and you're still looking at the list of what they can and can't do depending on their die roll for that turn. The other thing is that for the original crowdfunding campaign of Vindication, where they had a set amount of small modules like pets, and I can't remember what else at this moment, but this solo mode made a adjustment to their solo fan-made rules so that you could integrate each of those modules as you see fit. And that also made it more enjoyable. So I think there was like secret paths and pets that I've played with most of the time when I do play the solo mode for Vindication. Unfortunately, the only thing that I do have to state about this now is that I also backed the Chronicles and Hamlets expansion for Vindication, and the main reason I have not been able to play those is unfortunately the BGG user did not update the solo modes to work with those, so I'm still waiting for someone to play with me. Please play with me. But again, it is competitive. The solo mode is minimal to use. You're basically referencing the tree of action selection for what you're doing. Yeah, maybe I'll insert a picture of the game somewhere because it's behind the couch and I don't really want to climb over it with you here. So we are getting down to our last couple of games that I'm going to reference. This one is, so 2-player games are the hardest for me to get to the table. Sometimes I'm able to if it is enough of an accessible game to family members. So this one I was eventually able to play with family, but I can't believe that I didn't even think of this for how easy of a solo mode can be made for this game. So this game is Sky Team, and this one was such a popular 2-player only game. There's a campaign in it, and it's basically dice rolling and trying to, within communication limits, try to get your plane to land safely at a certain amount of turns taken. As you go on in the campaign, difficulties may or may not occur that you also have to try to figure out the puzzle based on your random die rolls and not being able to communicate with your pilot or co-pilot to make sure that those spots are taken care of. So I believe this solo variant, oh no, my computer just died. So for the rest of the solo variants, I will just tag them in the description below or maybe just write their name somewhere, I don't know. But for the Sky Team solo variant, what you're basically doing is you decide if you're playing as the pilot or the co-pilot, and you take that selection of dice. So there are 4 blue dice and there are 4 orange dice. If you're playing as a pilot, you take your 4 blue dice and you roll them all at the same time that you regularly would in a multiplayer game. You'll decide on each of your turns where you'll be placing your die. So you have like a 1, a 3, a 5, and a 6 or something. And there is a plane on the first section that you need to clear the path so that your plane can sail through without crashing. So you take your 1 and you place it on the track that would divert away from that plane, and therefore you take that plane off of your sky area and it's free to fly. So that danger is done and dealt with. Now, for the co-pilot, when you're running their orange dice, what you'll be doing is you'll only be rolling 1 die on their turn, and then you'll be determining the best place to put their 1 die on the map. So again, it's as close as you can probably possibly get to simulating a solo mode for this type of 2-player only game, but it's enjoyable and it made the game accessible, and I was able to buy the game myself and try it. And if you don't have somebody else to play with, it's your own little efficiency puzzle that I've liked to play. So this video is probably really long because I am doing this for a really long time. Oh, I forgot, the Sky Team solo mode is obviously cooperative, as everyone is playing it cooperative. So let's just get to the last one, Azul. So Azul can be played solo, and this can be played solo, and I know this one. It is Ricky Royal from Box of Delights again. A 1-sheet little handy thing that helps you play your game. So for Ricky Royal's solo mode, you play your turns as you regularly would, and on the AI's turns, they will select tiles from the different circular areas that have tiles based on which tile has more of a set of tiles. And then it'll also go from priority left to right. So utilizing the solo mode is very easy. You'll see what you can, more of an efficiency puzzle in the way that you know what they will prioritize, and therefore when do you want to grab certain things for yourself. And then it's over a set amount of rounds that you have to get the most points that you possibly can using this type of efficiency puzzle. And it makes the game accessible. I've tried it. I would say that out of all of these solo modes, I wouldn't say this is one that justifies buying it only for solo. I do prefer it multiplayer, but it did make it accessible solo so that I can still play. And also, Azul is one of the games I never win. BGA in person, I don't know what it is. I have a hard time winning this one. And I think that's because I keep forgetting that there is a take that drafting thing that happens. And maybe that's why it works solo for me. But anyways, that is 10 games that were multiplayer and inaccessible until some of y'all came up with brainy answers and made solo modes for people like me. And I'm very appreciative because this let me realize that I didn't have to just wait for games to have a solo mode or completely write off some games that I would have been really interested in but only had 2 to 4 to 5 players. And back in the day, I sound like a dinosaur. Back a few years ago, it was really hard, I think, to find games that had solo modes included, and I feel it's something that publishers prioritized a lot more in recent years. So I haven't used or found as many fan-made solo modes because there are accessible ones already included officially. But thankfully for the community, I might not have stayed in the board game hobby because I was only able to play games by myself. So thank you to all of you guys that let me play games more by myself. This has been a fun video. I know I've actually kept no hat and new glasses. I have another pair of new glasses. Maybe I'll wear that for the next one. This is just rambling now, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye!